Well, this is America, and this is the Trump House here in western Pennsylvania. It's seen as something of a symbol of support for a president who is struggling at the moment to bring the war with Iran to an end. American might appears not to be working. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, with energy prices going up. We'll be talking about public reaction to that here in Pennsylvania in a few minutes' time. Let's though go first to our Washington DC studio and Alex Marquardt.
Thank you, Richard. 5 months after the war with Iran began, President Trump is facing a growing strategic and political dilemma. Military pressure has done little to force Tehran to compromise. Iran is refusing key U.S. demands. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed. And many Americans, including many in Trump's MAGA base, are questioning the cost of this conflict. I want to go back to Richard Gaisford, who joins us from outside that so-called Trump House in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which, of course, is a critical swing state. Richard, how strong is the support for the president where you are?
Well, when I tell you that Donald Trump won here in Westmoreland County in the last 3 presidential elections quite strongly, you can see that there's a lot of backing for him here historically. And you can see it still in this building, the Trump House, which stands as something of a beacon to those MAGA supporters, the Make America Great Again crowd that put their weight behind him in those elections. This is a place that so often feels quite distant from the decision makers in Washington. I came here back in 2020, Alex, during that 2020 campaign, and met with so many of these people who, for the first time, really felt that they could be talking about politics and that something could be done for them. So I thought, why not come back here to Latrobe, to Westmoreland County, to ask them what they feel now about the state of the economy almost 2 years into the Trump presidency, with that war overshadowing everything. In the western reaches of Pennsylvania, small industrial cities like Latrobe and the rural communities that surround it have backed Donald Trump since he first set his eyes on the presidency. Having created the Trump House in 2016 as a MAGA volunteer, Leslie Rossi is now a Republican state representative in Pennsylvania, defending the president's record as the war in Iran continues more than 10,000 kilometers away.
This needed to happen, whether people like it or not. I think it's a bump we're going to get through. But when you think about Iran and the nuclear capabilities they had, somebody had to do this. There is no one in decades that would even try. They were too worried about their reputation, about dealing with Iran. Trump wasn't afraid. He's not afraid of anything. He's remarkable, and I'm so proud to have him as my president.
And let's see if I can find one.
But Sharon Shearer isn't as convinced. Her small business sells and fixes lampshades in Latrobe, with costs rising. The one-time Democrat who flipped to vote for Trump is worried about the war.
He didn't have to do that. And there's a lot of people can't figure out why he did, because he never said he was for that. What can he do? He can't just say, okay, we're not going to bomb you anymore. Sorry, bye, because that won't work. I don't know what's going to change. We need to get some more down-to-earth politicians. They're all making so much money. It's all about the money.
2 years ago, Donald Trump was in Latrobe, talking up his peace-making credentials, promising to bring energy prices down.
We were in no wars. Think of it. I started no wars. Everybody thought I'd be like in a war. I'll be in a war in 2 days. No, it didn't work out. My personality stopped wars. And I will cut your energy and electricity prices in half within 12 months of taking office. 50%.
None of that's happened, has it?
I think we all have a vision of what we would like to see and how you would like to run your district or the country or whatever, where you're covering, at what level of government. But you find there's so many factors in the way, or things change around the world and it affects and it trickles down. So you do the best you can and you go forward.
At a local fuel station, there's a food bank for those who are suffering from a cost of living crisis, and where high petrol prices are there for all to see.
Every time I come, they seem to get higher.
Do you hope the war will come to an end soon?
Oh, definitely, yes.
And how do you think that's going to happen?
I think our president's going to have to make some concessions and step back a little bit. He's using our country and our people to get what he wants. So.
And joining you now to discuss this further is Democratic strategist Mally Smith and former Republican Congressman from Virginia, Tom Davis. Thank you both for joining me today. This is a fascinating moment in this war. There's been so much back and forth, but still at the end of the day, there is no end in sight. And we are now in the final sprint towards the midterms, 90 days out. And we have, of course, had that big primary in Michigan just last night. Congressman, if you're a Republican candidate for Congress in this final stretch, how much do you want this Iran war to go away?
Well, for your own reelection purposes, you'd like it to go away, but you got to look at the long term. If you're in there, you don't want to leave and not get the job done. So look, we have a saying, voters aren't stupid, they're just not informed, but they know when the shoe is pinching and it's time to get a new pair of shoes. And right now the shoe is pinching. And I think that's what Iran is counting on, is that their pain threshold is higher than ours in a democracy.
But is there any exit for the president that makes the war and all of the effects that are being felt domestically go away for those Republican candidates?
Well, obviously, a deal is the shortest way to that. If you can get some semblance of that and get gas prices, because that's the most visible piece of this war to the average person. They don't see the rest of this.
Mally, how much of the Democratic messaging is and will be in these next 3 months about the war in Iran and its effects?
Well, our chief message is affordability, but that clearly, as what you just showed on your program, is tied into the Iran war. And Democrats are going to hammer home two messages, which is first, President Trump promised that he was going to end inflation on day one. Inflation was 3% when he was inaugurated. It peaked up to 4.2%. It's 3.5% now, but it is going to go up again since we've seen another surge in gas prices. And President Trump promised that we would have no new foreign wars, we would have no wars of choice. And President Trump launched a war of choice in this military operation with Iran. So Democrats are going to hammer home on both of those issues. And even if President Trump is able to get a deal, which has eluded him to this point, this is lasting economic pain. Gas prices are not going to go down to where they were before Election Day. And that doesn't even factor in the fact that we have higher food costs, we have higher diesel that makes transportation and goods more expensive. So it's going to be lasting pain for the Trump administration.
I do want to talk about these rise in prices, and including diesel, what you just mentioned, because while there is discontent at the gas pump over the cost of regular fuel, diesel fuel is used to transport goods, and that is also surging. And that higher cost is being passed on to the consumers, even if they're not filling up their cars with diesel. So diesel fuel prices in the U.S. vary by region, depending on local supply networks, demand, and state tax rates. And in the first week of July, the national average price was $4.57. At the start of August, as the hostilities resumed between the U.S. and Iran, that national average was $5.34, so 77-cent increase in just a few weeks. Let's talk about something else, sulfur. One of the less reported consequences of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has been the impact on sulfur prices. Why does that matter? Well, the Gulf is the source of about half of the world's sulfur, and those supplies are shut down. Sulfur is needed to make fertilizer, which of course is a key concern for rural U.S. voters, many of whom are loyal to Donald Trump. When the war began in late February, a ton of sulfur cost around $500. Today, that is up to more than $1,300, an increase of 258%. So, Congressman, is this more about the consequences of the war, these rising prices, rising inflation, or is it the war itself that is more dangerous politically, the tens of billions of dollars that have been
It's the
spent?
immediate consequences before the election. As I said before, I think Iran understands that because we're a democracy, their pain level, their pain threshold is higher than ours. Their economy can be in ruins. They can have 1,000% inflation. It doesn't matter to that regime, but we have midterms coming up, and they think they can hold that over Donald Trump so that they can get a better deal.
But at the same time, Mally, you do have Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, going up to Capitol Hill asking for almost $70 billion more dollars. Surely it's not just the personal pain that is being felt, those personal expenses going up. It's also the watching these tens of billions being doled out to the Pentagon to continue this war that we're still mired in.
Yeah, I think the immediate concern that most Americans are focused on is gas prices. But The fact that we have now had 2 Republican presidents get us into wars of choice that have led to U.S. service members die is incredibly damning, and it is going to damage President Trump's legacy. And I think the issue you have here, too, is that I'm sure some folks in the Trump administration could sit down and tell you all the reasons why they thought this was just. Same with the Bush administration and the Iraq war. But to most Americans, they're looking at this and they're saying, this doesn't seem like anything we should have been in. This doesn't seem like an undertaking we should have pursued. And the issue you have, too, is that if you look at past U.S. engagements in the Middle East, it's hard for an American voter to see where we've had success. Afghanistan, we spend decades. Right when we leave, the Taliban takes over. Iraq was not a great situation. Syria, Libya. So I think the United States voter is looking at this and saying, why are we doing this again?
And Tom, you argue that the midterms are going to put enormous pressure on the White House to find some kind of agreement. How much of a concern do you think the midterms are for President Trump?
Well, that's a good question. I think what's equally important is his legacy. Can he, once he's in there, can he clean the place out? Can he remake the Middle East? And that is worth, I think when you balance it off, that's probably more important than the politics. But that's something the White House is going to have to calibrate. I know it's something Iran is counting on, that he'll be a political animal and react, and they'll be able to get out intact, or basically intact, versus the damage that's occurred. But they may be miscalculating on that. Look, historically, the in party loses seats in the House. It's happened for 100 years, except for 3 cycles. And that's likely to happen under even the best of circumstances. Senate's a little bit different, but losing the House doesn't make that much difference, except the subpoenas and the investigations go over to the other side. Legislation is still gridlocked in this Congress.
How much influence do you think, Congressman, Republican leadership on the Hill has with the White House?
I think he listens to him, and you got to calibrate. But you got to look at the good of the order. Do we want to allow Iran to get these nuclear weapons? And once you're there, if you back out now or cut a bad deal, are you laying the predicate that you're going to have to face 5, 6, 7 years from now? So I think when you take a look at legacy, you want to say, did I get this problem solved? We don't know how this lands. This isn't a lost war. The average American only really feels it right now with some inflationary pressures that you mentioned before. The rest of this, I don't think we see. I think the Afghanistan withdrawal was more visible to Americans because of the way it was handled.
Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, including the intelligence community, the Iranians were very far from getting a nuclear weapon. And now the can really has been kicked down the road in terms of coming to some kind of nuclear agreement. President Trump is signaling again that a deal may be close, but finding an off-ramp has proven very complicated. Aljazeera's Eva McKend explains.
If history has taught American presidents anything, starting a war is often much easier than ending one. Think about Iraq. President George W. Bush expected the initial military campaign in 2003 to be swift. Instead, U.S. forces maintained a presence there for more than 2 decades. Now, President Trump faces a similar challenge in the Middle East, finding the exit. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched strikes against Iran. Trump thought military pressure would force Tehran to negotiate from a position of weakness.
Lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or, in the alternative, face certain death.
Instead, the conflict settled into a cycle of escalation. By March, Trump suggested it was nearing the end.
We've wiped every single force in Iran out very completely. And we've won. Let me say, we've won. You know, you never like to say too early you won. We won. We won the bet. In the first hour, it was over.
In June, a ceasefire raised hopes fighting might be done. That truce collapsed. The ceasefire did not resolve Iran's nuclear program. And who controls the terms of a final agreement?
Ceasefire done. Is the MOU dead?
To me, I think it's over.
Tehran believes time is on their side. By threatening global energy supplies and disrupting shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, they're betting economic and political pressure inside this country will eventually outweigh continued military pressure. 5 months into the conflict, 18 American soldiers have died. And a pattern has formed. Threats of escalation, followed by promises of resolution that have yet to materialize.
And we're talking at the request of Iran, backed by Saudi Arabia, backed by UAE, and backed by Qatar in particular, but others also. Many countries called, the leaders of many are friendly with a lot of them, almost all of them, one way or the other, and they all wanted to give this a last chance. This is a last chance.
With the midterm elections approaching, the pressure is growing on Trump to turn another promise of a deal into a lasting exit without looking like he surrendered.
It's been very hard, Mally, to know what's going on. There have been all these promises of an imminent deal. Then there have been promises of huge strikes to come on Iran. Is there any democratic messaging that is forming around this series of stops and starts around the strikes and the diplomatic talks?
Well, I think it's emphasizing that President Trump and his administration have a credibility issue. Every week, it's like Groundhog's Day, where we get the fact that we're either going to annihilate Iran, and he threatens military action that borders on or would be war crimes, to the Iranians are great and we're going to have a lasting deal. And that is really sapping confidence from Americans. And it was Trump, but also you see administration officials get into this problem where they are saying things that they can't back up. We had Hegseth, a couple weeks after we started the military engagement, said that Iran was rendered militarily inoperable. A few weeks after that, he said Midnight Hammer had gotten us to total victory. Well, we're 4 months past those statements and we're still at war. They told us that they had rendered Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, essentially destroyed them. Well, we are seeing that Iran still has some sort of ballistic missile capability because they are still able to project their power and shoot missiles at us. So I think it's highlighting those inconsistencies and continuing to show that Trump does not seem to have an off-ramp to this war.
Let's say that there were some kind of agreement, that the war ended, there was some kind of agreement, a compromise on the Strait of Hormuz. They probably still wouldn't be able to work out a nuclear issue just yet. But without the fighting, without those expenses, without U.S. service members being killed, does that remove, Congressman, a major issue that Republicans are now confronting in these midterms?
Well, it certainly helps the narrative because the person on the ground, things are going to improve in terms of the prices they're paying at the pump, the prices they're paying for groceries and the like. But remember, historically, going into a midterm, the Democratic base is juiced. That is much more intense. The out party is more intense than the president's party. And independent voters tend to use these opportunities to put a check on the president rather than giving him a blank check. That's 100 years of history. So it shouldn't surprise us at this point that the Republicans are facing a difficulty in the House. This doesn't solve it. It makes it easier, though.
Now that we get into the general election, we're looking more towards the independent voters. It's not just the base from either side who come out strongly in the primaries. I want to throw up some numbers from a recent poll by Quinnipiac in terms of the support for the military action against Iran. Republicans still generally support it at 74%, while independents oppose it at 69%. Democrats oppose it strongly at 89%. So, Mally, you have independents there overwhelmingly opposing this war, Democrats, of course, while there's still strong Republican support. How much are candidates focusing on those middle ground voters, the ones that who are either in the center or you can peel away from the right and the left?
Well, those are the folks they should focus on if they want to win the election, because there's this critical group of people called the double haters. They're folks who voted, they hated Hillary and Trump, but they voted for Trump. They hated Biden and Trump, but they voted for Biden, and then Trump and Kamala, they voted for Trump. These are people who are not as aligned with either political party, and they're not following the news as much as regular partisans are. These are the people you want to win. And the problem that Republicans have is that they're feeling this economic pain from the war, and it is hard for Republicans to message themselves out of that because, again, these folks are not following politics day to day like some of the partisans are, so they might not even be getting some of the messaging Republicans are trying to do to dissuade them from voting for Democrats. And then the last thing I'd say is that this is clearly a losing issue for Republicans because you don't want to be on an issue where you have about 80% of your party and then independents are breaking heavily against you and then the other party is heavily against you. That's a classic route when it comes to a political issue. So Democrats are in a good place.
Does that essentially mean that Democrats will just stay on message? Because presumably they've been hitting that throughout the primary campaign. And you think that Republicans will start to ramp up their criticism a little bit, or at least be a little bit more pointed?
I think Republicans in swing districts should especially find ways that they can break with the president and find ways to break with this action on the Iran war. It used to be that politically presidents would give some at-risk members the leeway to be critical of things to maybe help them get reelected. Trump doesn't really operate that way, so it might be tougher for those swing members this election cycle.
Some more numbers from the same poll from Quinnipiac from just a few days ago. They polled American voters on immigration, on trade, on the economy, on foreign policy, and on Iran. So 5 different issues. And you can see there that on every single one, Donald Trump is underwater on these critical issues. So, Congressman, how much do you think the president is dragging down Republican candidates?
Well, looking at these numbers, it's not helpful at this point. But remember, these are individual races. These are congressional district by congressional district races. Dysfunctional candidates hurt the Democrats. I think they've put some candidates up there that are going to be more difficult to elect than more mainstream candidates. So you do this race by race, and wide-awake candidates can find those differentiations. 85% of the House, the only race that matters is the primary. November is just a constitutional formality. So this is focused on a handful of races around the country in the House and Senate. A lot of money will go in that. A lot of defining issues, and the quality of candidates makes a difference. And I think that's what gives the Republicans some hope. They're at a better financial advantage now than they've been at any time in the last decade.
Congressman, you noted that there is a natural swing back to the other party, the party that is out of power. In this case, there is a broad expectation that the Democrats will take at least the House. Of course, they're vying for the Senate as well. Mally, when you look at the issues that are motivating Democrats, where do you think Iran ranks?
I think Iran ranks second or third, and then the top concern, which is the top concern for all voters, is the economy. And then also Democrats are very concerned about corruption. We've had a myriad of scandals when it comes to President Trump enriching himself at the expense of the taxpayer. So I think those are the top 3. Probably they move around depending on the voter.
And then at the same time, we saw a record turnout, I believe, in Michigan last night, which is remarkable for a midterm primary, which is remarkable when it's in August and people are away. Generally speaking, turnout is rather muted in comparison to a presidential cycle. Congressman, do you think this issue of Iran and the other issues that follow as a result of that will suppress Republican voters?
I don't think it will suppress the Republican vote. I think the Trump base is behind him, but what we call Republican lights and independents who lean that way, I think you worry about turning them out at this point. Republicans get a little more complacent being the in party. That's traditional. The president's party Obama had that problem in 2010. Democrats suffered the worst midterm defeat since 1938. So I think Republicans do have a base problem in terms of how do you get people motivated to vote in this environment.
And if the base is the MAGA wing of the party, and you have a lot of people who will only turn out because Donald Trump is on the ballot, and he's not on the ballot in these races, how much of an effect is that going to have?
Well, that's the problem. I think that's where the president getting engaged. Democrats are going to come out anyway. I think the president getting engaged in some of these races can be helpful. You need to be careful, so in swing districts, because that can turn off independents. So it's a fine line, and you have to go district by district to see how you deploy your assets the most. But look, history is on the Democrat side. There's no question about that. Even with the redistricting help the Republicans have gotten from some of these legislatures coming in there, the House has always been uphill from day one. That's just history.
The war in Iran started on February 28th. As we came into this year, that same conventional wisdom held, Mally, that Democrats were in a good position to take back at least one house of Congress. How much do you think this war in Iran will, at the end of the day, affect who controls the 2 houses?
I think that if the war in Iran didn't happen, we definitely still would have won the House, given how thin the Republican majority was. But I think with the Iran war exacerbating an affordability crisis that was already upsetting voters, it's going to potentially give us the Senate. It's an uphill battle, but I think we potentially could have the Senate. And you're going to see us win in state legislator and governor's races and put places in play that we wouldn't have been able to previously. We talk about Texas with Tallarico. Ken Paxton is a bad candidate, but one of the reasons Tallarico is winning is the affordability crisis. So I think you're going to see some states come online that would not have otherwise.
Congressman, how much do you believe that Iran has moved the needle in terms of who will eventually control the houses?
It has not helped the economic situation on the ground for the average person. markets are at an all-time high. Stock market's doing well. If you're invested, you're doing well. But for people in the lower half of the economy, this has not been helpful. And I think that's the problem with the war. The shoe is pinching at this point, and people are saying maybe I need to balance things out a little bit.
Well, it's as we say, there's still so much back and forth. It is not clear what the conclusion is going to be to this conflict. And the tail is extremely long on a number of different fronts, particularly when it comes to cost. As you noted, affordability was already the major issue for voters in both parties, and certainly it has been ramped up as a result of this war. I want to thank you both for coming in today. Democratic strategist Mally Smith and former Congressman from Virginia, Tom Davis. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And that's all from me and the team here in Washington. I want to hand it back to Richard Gaisford in Pennsylvania and Aljazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for this edition of This is America. We'll be back each weekday at 18:30 GMT. That is 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. And you can always catch up on all of our programs on YouTube. For now, though, from Western Pennsylvania, it's goodbye.